Today, I'm going to tell you a story about one of the most powerful moments in my life when everything I believed in and identified with started to fall apart. Slowly, then quickly, then deeply. And this is around political beliefs and political identity. And it began happening in 2006. I'm so liberal that I once voted Republican. Do you know how liberal that is? To be so liberated that no political correctness or position dictates my behavior or choices? To break the rules of who I should like, vote for, or believe in as an alternative bisexual guy? Sounds pretty queer and liberal to me. Truth is a somatic experience for me. It's not about what I should believe or feel, but what actually feels congruent within me, within my body. When there is a rub, a stress that usually feels like a fist in my solar plexus, I know I'm out of alignment with my integrity, with my nature. I'm constricting against how nature wants to move me. And what I find especially humbling and even humiliating is this: I don't always like the direction it moves me in. When God takes the wheel, that bitch can sometimes drive me to Camden, New Jersey when I'd rather go to Cape May. And that's the strange, sensational, shamanic experience of listening to nature, to spirit, to God herself. And this is precisely what made me vote for a Republican in 2008. Here's how it happened. I was 19 years old and working at a corner store that was positioned right on the threshold between the haves and the have-nots. I had just dropped out of college, was living on food stamps, dreadlocked and face full of piercings, sleeping on a futon on the floor of my best friend's attic bedroom in an apartment he shared with two sweet but very filthy men. My job was to clean the house in exchange for free rent, and it was quite a job. To give you some idea of it, the bathroom was carpeted. They drank lots of alcohol, and no one had cleaned in years. So I got to live out my Virgo fantasy, put on my Mrs. Doubtfire wig, and be the housewife for these boys. A role, by the way, I absolutely love to play. I spent my days cleaning, working at the corner store, secretly writing songs when no one was around because I was a closet musician at the time, and crying while watching Hillary Clinton videos. I was campaigning for her and voting for her because I wanted a woman president. And then a woman named Renee entered the corner store and destroyed everything. She was a French descendant from the South, brought up on the teachings of Edgar Cayce, where she fasted for weeks on water with her father, marched in the streets as a social activist, and dedicated her life to helping people wronged by the system. Picture Melissa Etheridge with long brown hair. She always had a lit cigarette in her hand. She drove taxis for a living while studying to become a paralegal, and she sang beautiful, classic rock songs of her own on the guitar. She began telling me about this guy named Ron Paul, how he believed in decriminalizing drugs and making them legal, how he believed in gay rights and that gays could marry, a big topic at the time for you young queens listening, how he believed America should stop policing other countries and meddling in Middle Eastern politics and communities. And then she said, he's a Republican. And I thought, well, I liked him up until that moment, because until this point in my life, I hated Republicans. They were the enemy, especially for me and my queer, weird, fringy friends. I grew up in a very red religious part of Pennsylvania, where it was normal to walk through a picket line on our way to the annual Fairy Festival, or where you had to hide your face in shame walking from an abortion clinic, where religious activists greet you with fake blood, Bibles, and shame. The only gay boy in my town who was openly gay took his own life because he couldn't handle the harassment anymore. These haters were not Democrats, they were Republicans. So I did what most human beings do. I assumed they were all the same and stayed far away from them. And in my division, in my isolation from them, my own hatred and dehumanization of them was able to grow and fester, because you can only dehumanize something you don't know. Once you befriend the enemy, you start to have a hard time dehumanizing them. Just listen to episode 199 with Daryl Davis to hear how a black man befriends members of the KKK. And not only does it keep him sane and open-hearted, it transforms the hearts of these Klan leaders so deeply that they end up leaving and giving Daryl their robes as a symbol of solidarity. To date, 200 of them have left the Klan because of his kindness and friendship and curiosity with them. That is the power of connection, not division. I would come home from work and tell my friends all about Renee and Ron Paul. Colin got me the job at the corner store. He too was enthralled with the stories and beliefs of Ron Paul from Renee. He was my best friend at the time, and it was his bedroom floor I slept on. Picture a Korean punk rock goth with shaved eyebrows that he drew on just like Amanda Palmer did in the Dresden Dolls, while sporting foot-long bright blue Liberty spikes from his head, long fingernails that he would sharpen like little knives and paint blood red, and tights that he wore on his, as a Puerto Rican friend called them, impeccable legs. We would spend our night chain smoking till 4 a.m, talking about our dreams of leaving Pennsylvania for New York City and working on our albums together. Colin is a gifted poet and talented hip-hop artist. Our band consisted of a born-again Christian beatboxer named Jordan, a folk singer and artist who looked like Norma Jean and sounded like Judy Collins named Ashley, and a hardcore guitarist named Evan. We were a motley crew, and our other friends were as well. An Indian American named Tommy, gorgeous and bound up in the tightest, blackest punk clothing imaginable. Nikki, a Japanese girl who shared my love for filth culture, and John Waters, a gay guy named Seth who was also our manager at the corner store who made out with my closet boyfriend at a party. I have a photo of it. And Joy, my lovely Dennis Rodman mulatto fantasy. Joy was my coworker at the corner store, and despite her name and the expectations that came with it, she was very angry, like muy enojada. She was 4 feet tall, looked like Dennis Rodman but even prettier, and had a giant scorpion tattooed on her neck. She would bring homemade roast beef for lunch and heavily salt it. She took a cigarette break every time someone pissed her off, which was every 15 minutes. She threw things at people, screamed at them, and would refuse to even ring certain people up at the register if she didn't like them. I loved her. I laughed at her. I thought she was this little cute chihuahua, and something about that disarmed her, and she was really tender with me and super protective of me. I did not worry about armed robbers on shift with Joy. She would often sing the song West End Girls, and I would love watching her dance to it and move her shoulders like a little robot. She was incredible. I tell you about all these people because we all came to love Ron Paul. Even though he was the opposite of everything we wanted to vote for, a white Christian man who was a Republican, yet my black friends, my gay friends, my strange friends, my liberal friends, we all found something about him that we just really liked and couldn't figure out. So one day we decided to drive to DC to see him speak in person. When we got there, it was more like a rock concert than a political rally. A diverse sea of races, sexes, sexualities, and even political leanings. Democrats, anarchists, progressives, Republicans, libertarians, independents, gay, straight, bi, trans, black, white, Chinese, native, Asian, and lots of Hispanics. I thought, well, fuck me. This was not how my Republican rally fantasy played out in my mind. Then, a native elder from the Lakota tribe got on stage and my brain shattered. This man spoke in his native tongue, and then he translated and said, "That means, hello, my relatives," and tears instantly began streaming down my cheeks. I remember him saying he would vote for anyone who didn't want to fund the government more because of what the government had done to his people. Something I never considered, and to this day I don't see being discussed in decolonization circles. And then I learned Ron Paul was friends with this man and many other tribes for decades. And then I learned Ron Paul's campaign manager was a gay man. And then I found myself for the next many months campaigning for a Republican. Okay, take that in. Which meant I shared space with many Republicans for the first time in a long time. Dreadlocked, fingernails painted, queer as folk, and they all treated me with respect. There was only one who avoided me like the plague, but we're talking one out of hundreds. I started slowly uncoupling. My bias and discriminations against Christians and Republicans as a queer witch was transforming. I was humanizing them by befriending them. I say them because I don't identify as a Republican. I was campaigning for someone who happened to be a Republican because I loved his policies, but I still maintain a true independent nature. You could call me bipartisan curious or politically fluid. I'll answer to either. What Ron Paul was teaching me was the age-old wisdom, don't judge a book by its cover. Here was a straight, white, Christian Republican hanging out with the queers, the atheists, the Democrats, and even pro-choice people like me, though he was a staunch pro-life advocate. He was the embodiment of an American, someone who practices their capacity for difference. He was a true Christian in terms of loving everyone with an open heart as an equal brother and sister, and not trying to change anyone, but just accept them as they were. It was one of the greatest life-changing moments I had ever experienced. It wasn't about him actually winning. Looking back, there was no way he could win, but try telling my 19-year-old self that at the time. The Republicans hated him because he was extremely anti-war and pro-drugs. The Democrats hated him because he was anti-government and pro-free market capitalism. Christians hated him because he befriended gays and atheists. Like myself, he didn't fit into his own categories or groups. He was a queer, fringe, marginalized person within his own identity. And then I later discovered that he always seen himself as a libertarian, but ran as a Republican because it was the only way he could get on the ballot and the national debate stage. So he was in Republican drag, something else I can respect. I'll never forget watching him debate his fellow Republicans about 9/11. Everyone was using their time on stage to dehumanize Muslims and people in Iraq and the Middle East as if they were all terrorists, while stoking the fear of terrorism through the narrative that, quote, they attack us because we're rich and free. Even the Democrats were doing this. Ron Paul took the stand, barely had any time to answer questions, was laughed at, yelled at, mocked, and applauded against when someone else had a counter-argument to him, and he still maintained his composure and his centeredness. He was creating a new conversation that I had never heard before, a conversation around a term called blowback, which means there are repercussions for how we treat people around the world. What he was essentially speaking about was what I would see as the early stages of decolonization around the world, how we start removing the force America has oppressed so many different countries with our military presence. And as he talked about this, he was explaining how a lot of the attacks that come to us from the Middle East are a result from us already attacking the Middle East. This is what Rudy Giuliani said, and the follow-up from Ron Paul just made my heart melt.
It's an extraordinary statement of someone who lived through the attack of September 11, that we invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for September 11. And I would ask the congressman to withdraw that comment and tell us that he didn't really mean that.
Congressman?
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
It was this moment right here when he had my vote. It was a moral vote, not a realistic one. I was voting for the only peaceful candidate I saw on the Democrat or the Republican stage. Someone with enough courage to say, hey, they might attack us because we're destroying their communities. Someone with enough trust to say, I believe people can learn how to self-govern their lives and decisions without the government telling them what to do. Someone who had enough heart to bring together all the fringe demographics of America into peaceful rallies where we listened, asked really interesting new questions, and connected to people who opposed one another to find emerging friendships. Becoming Republican that year and voting for a Republican changed my life because I stopped fearing and hating half of the country. I think of the Queers for Palestine movement. When I first saw it, I laughed because of how ironic it was, and then I thought of how incredible it is that a group of people in this country can humanize people who might kill them or dislike them or hate them in another country. I remember watching interviews with people in Palestine 8 years ago about how they felt about gays and lesbians. It was so rare in their culture that some of the men didn't even know how to translate it, besides to say men who lay with other men, to which they would respond with things like disgusting or it's a sin or death penalty. And so when I see Queers for Palestine, I think of how that's actually the American way, to find kindness towards someone who you oppose, to humanize someone who may dehumanize you. But can the Queers for Palestine also consider Queers for Christians, or Queers for Republicans, or Queers for MAGA country? If radical compassion and humanization is only used for one group politically, then to me it seems much more performative than an actual transformation. And I bring this up because I'm always being asked what I think about the conflict in the Middle East, what I think about how to heal the world, what I think about how to end oppression and violence. And my answer has been the same all these years, regardless of the situation or which peoples are affected. My answer is always this: start with yourself. Identify your own violence, your own inner oppressor, your own dehumanization tactics that you're unaware of. I spent 19 years of my life dehumanizing half of the country, even my own family members, and then I stopped. But I didn't just think about it, I acted. It was like going through withdrawal, sitting with Republicans, pro-life people, Trumpers, even racists and homophobes, and finding a connection and a humanity behind their beliefs changed my life. It transformed the part of me that was able to shut down my heart and not feel. And this is how war is possible. You cannot bomb someone who you empathize with. Your body would stop you. It's in the numbness and the not feeling that we're able to commit such horrible acts against one another. So when I want to end the war in the Middle East, and believe me, I do, I begin with the war in me. Who am I at odds with? Who do I tell divisive stories about? Who do I hate, name call, and use as a scapegoat for my own pain and fear? If I can stop hating, then hate stops with me, and I believe it ripples. The same way Daryl Davis inspired 200 men to leave the KKK, I have inspired radical lesbians to go home on Christmas and actually enjoy spending time with their homophobic father. I've inspired trans people to enjoy spending time with their grandparents who still call them by their birth name and refer to their pronouns which match their birth sex. I've inspired people who hated their abusive dads to care for them in their final months while they died in a nursing home. I don't insist any of you do this, but when you sense the freedom and ease in my heart or in the heart of someone else who stops hating and dividing from someone, that feeling can become quite alluring. It's infectious, actually. All this work I do in the world on non-duality, on curiosity, seeing the other side, and being wrong about people to open my heart to them began taking its roots in those early days at the gas station. All because I voted for a fucking Republican. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.